We are glad that you are here today. We are excited about the program that is about to happen. I think it's a very important opportunity for students to consider some options that you may be thinking about, but not really have any focused idea of how to fulfill maybe what might be a latent kind of dream. And we're going to have a fellow student, now a graduate, come and speak with you about how she fulfilled what has become very much a dream of hers and certainly a passion of hers. And I'll introduce her in just a few moments. But before we do, I'd like for us to think in a wider context. We're thinking about justice today. And if you've had the TV on at all and happened to even flip by a news channel, you have seen pictures coming from other parts of the world, primarily Syria, where there are just awful things happening. Innocent people being killed, their property being destroyed, and their lives being deeply impacted by the effects of war and government action. And so I'd like for us just to be still just for a few moments and to be aware of the wider context that we live in a world where there is much injustice, much suffering. And then I'll lead us in a brief word of prayer and then we'll begin. Let's pray. O Lord, you have said that the peacemakers are blessed. Those who are able to bring justice and wholeness to life. We are this morning freshly aware of how much unpeace there is in our world, how much suffering there is in our world. We pray that you would be with those in the highest positions of various countries who are considering ways of pushing towards peace, of mounting pressures that can bring about justice and wholeness and life. And so we pray for your world, that in the world that you so love, that there would be kindness where there is hatred, where there would be reconciliation, where there is now tension, that there would be plenty where there is now want. And we ask somehow, O God, that you might use our small hands in bringing about your dream of peace for the world and of justice for all. For this we pray in your most holy name. Amen. I'm going to introduce our speaker in just a moment. Before I do, I want to call your attention to some facts about which she and I will talk in just a few moments, but facts that I think are important for you to sit with as you listen to this conversation. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. We think of politically oppressive countries. We might even name some. But it is the United States that imprisons more of its own people than any other country in the world. And 90 to 95% of those people who are incarcerated have one thing in common. They come from poverty. In addition, those who come from poverty lack the financial resources and access to get the very best legal care they can get. And so therefore they are left with oftentimes an overworked public defender who may just barely meet them and whose only real recourse legally is just to plead their case. 80% conviction rate of those 95% who come from poverty, 80% of those are convicted. 71% of those who are convicted serve jail time. So you don't need too much imagination to connect those dots, that there is a segment of our population, those who are coming from poverty, who are being disproportionately underrepresented legally, over-prosecuted, and over-imprisoned. That affects communities, that affects lives, that affects our nation. You will also not be surprised that there is a disproportional amount of those people who are being incarcerated who are minority. In the state of Georgia, about 33%, about a third of the citizens of the state of Georgia are African American. But in our prisons in Georgia, almost 2/3 are African American. There's something wrong, and we need to work on resolving that wrong and bringing about justice and mercy and kindness. And so I'm very pleased to introduce to you someone today who has devoted her life to that very work. Work which I would call perhaps maybe the real ministry among us. Ashley Deadweiler is a Mercer graduate, 2006 graduate, graduated with a degree in political science and then also double majored in Spanish. And she just told me this. I thought this was really funny. Students, you'll like this. Ashley was actually persuaded by the foreign language department to stay around another semester and get a double major in Spanish. And they said, we really need you to boost up the GPA in our department. So she was a designated hitter for the Department of Foreign Languages. After her graduation from the undergraduate program here, she enrolled in the Walter F. George School of Law and is a 2010 graduate of that school. While she was here, she was very active in reigniting, I think is maybe the best way to say it, Amnesty International, a very important program here on campus. And then while she was at the law school, she participated in the law and public service program run by Professor Tim Floyd, who is here with us today, and we're delighted that you're here, Tim. Thank you. Ashley is a person who cares very much about doing justice, and doing justice through the legal work that is now hers. She serves as staff attorney for the Macon branch of the Georgia Justice Project, and we are very delighted, Ashley, to have you with us as our guest this morning. So if you'll come, join us here, please.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ashley, the first thing I want to talk with you about is just the Georgia Justice Project. You are staff attorney there. You've been there how long?
Actually going on 4 years now.
4 years, okay. And the Macon office, the Macon branch, is just recently getting underway.
Right. During my second year of law school, we started the Macon branch and then officially started under my fellowship 2 years ago.
Okay. Tell us about the Georgia Justice Project. Most of us here have not heard about the Georgia Justice Project. That's new language for us, a new term for us. So tell us about the Georgia Justice Project. How did it get started? And what does it do, and how does it do it?
Georgia Justice Project is a group of lawyers and social workers who kind of combine their specialties to figure out how to keep somebody out of a cycle of crime and poverty. So we try to break that cycle by utilizing our legal skills and also our social worker skills to figure out what's leading people to commit crimes in the first place and help them to learn what they need to do, the changes that they need to make so that they can break that cycle. And actually we were founded by an attorney in Atlanta named John Pickens, and shortly thereafter our current executive director, Doug Amar, came on, and they founded the project because of the facts that you talked about at the beginning, which is that our prison population in this state and in this country is continually growing. A lot of that's due to some of the societal shifts that we had during the tough on crime and war on drugs years in the legislatures that created this problem of over-incarceration. The state was unable to meet that burden, as you noted. The public defenders, there's not enough of them. They don't have enough resources to be able to help people. So our founder and Doug saw this need and saw that there might be a better model that could help break the cycle of crime and poverty rather than just put a Band-Aid on the problem.
Because the recidivism rate, that is those who return after they've been incarcerated, is nationally around 2/3.
It's very high. I think the last one I saw was 67%. So it's very likely that once a person is arrested, they're going to go back and be rearrested. A lot of that has to do with the barriers that they encounter after they've been arrested, not just the punishment they faced in the criminal justice system, but also the societal punishments that they face afterwards due to having a criminal record. Also, if those underlying problems that led them to that crime in the first place are not addressed, what's to stop that same cycle from continuing? It's interesting to note, though, at Georgia Justice Project, and this was one of the things that drew me to the agency in the first place, is that Georgia Justice Project boasts a much lower recidivism rate for their client. I believe the last time we did a study, it was around 20-25%. Is that correct, Doug? But it's much lower than the state and national averages of recidivism, because when you take the time to invest in a person and figure out what exactly has led them to crime in the first place, they're much less likely to go back and reoffend.
So the Georgia Justice Project, the language almost sounds like this is exclusively a legal service, but I'm hearing you say that it really is much more than that.
It goes much deeper. At Georgia Justice Project, we do come in contact with an individual because they're having a legal issue, and we do have lawyers that are well-trained, well-experienced to be able to deal and give them effective legal representation. But really, it goes much deeper than that. When a client comes to us, they meet first with our lawyers and our social workers together. So from the get-go, our social workers are able to kind of identify whatever it is that's holding that individual back. It could be drug addiction, it could be mental illness, it could just be frustration with life circumstances or never having anybody that cared about them. And now they've got somebody that's invested in them that's going to help them identify the things that they need to change and give them some personal responsibility for us to be able to help them with the problems that they're currently facing in the legal system.
So, and again, we have students here. If a student ever wanted to move in this direction professionally, as you have, of course, a legal background. Are there options for, can you envision options down the road? And I know the Atlanta office is more developed. It's been around for about 25 years, and so Macon is new. On staff, are there social workers? How do you connect with, beyond the legal services, how do you connect with other services that you offer that deal with the more social issues?
We do have social workers on staff, and then we also coordinate with community partners. So there's a lot of ways to help individuals that are caught in a cycle. Our social workers work with them directly to address whatever is the underlying issue that committed them or convinced them to go down this path in the first place. But we also partner with other groups where they have social workers or just individuals that are working for nonprofits that help people with a variety of different issues. For example, Goodwill here in Macon, they have a lot of people on staff that were just interested in giving back to the community and are there every day to help train them in using computers, teach them how to apply for jobs. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. I wouldn't say you just had to be a lawyer or a social worker. I think there's a lot of ways to plug in to try to help individuals because, like I said, there's so many underlying causes. It's hard for one person to address all of them. You really need a lot of different groups to be able to address all of the issues.
And I will say one thing, and I do this in taking my hat off to Doug and to Daisy and Tim and others, Melissa, who have been so active in making that extension of the Georgia Justice Project down to the Macon area. As I remember from a previous conversation, this really is a very unique program. Not one that you might anticipate emerging in the Deep South. Is there anyone that's doing this kind of work exactly elsewhere, or is this?
No, not in Georgia. There are some other groups nationally that are trying to address reentry issues, but they are typically not modeled like Georgia Justice Project. I think Georgia Justice Project is very unique in combining the lawyer and social worker model and trying to take what we call a holistic approach to representing individuals. There are a lot of groups that are looking towards criminal justice reform, but I haven't seen many that address it exactly in the way we do. I have had a lot of calls from other states that are interested in the model because, we point to those statistics. It's working much better than the state models. And honestly, my hope originally getting involved with Georgia Justice Project is that eventually the state would take notice that what we were doing was working much better than what they were doing and maybe adopt that model for dealing with reentry issues, for dealing with reducing our prison populations, and really with getting people back out there to be productive and contributing members of society because they've all got something to offer. And if we lock them away, we're not able to pull out that human capital and the things that they have to bring that are unique to our society. So now there's not, but hopefully in the future there will be others that replicate.
And just as a note, one of the things that Ashley's talking so eloquently about is what Georgia Justice Project does once a crime has been committed and how you all then move to engagement. And I just want to offer to our students one figure that will perhaps help you understand the beginnings of a person entering into the criminal justice system. If you're a city planner and you're trying to determine how many prison beds you provide for in your community, if you're trying to project down the road how many prison beds you're going to need in the next decade or so, do you know how you do that? You go figure out what the third grade reading scores are in the local elementary school. And if a child cannot read by the end of third grade, the last grade they actually teach reading, then they have something like a 75% chance of entering the criminal justice system. So what you're doing is really picking up where we've already started failing people from their earliest days. All right, enough of the commercial. I want to ask you a question. So how did a nice girl like you, who had a bright future as an attorney, probably being able to pay off loans a lot earlier than you're going to be able to now, because I'm assuming that the Georgia Justice Project, that one of the adjectives to describe them might not be lucrative. I don't know if that's fair to say. Deep pockets are not quite there yet.
Right.
So what compelled a young lady like you who is recruited by the Spanish people to boost the scores in the foreign language department? What prompted a person like you to become involved in work that isn't going to have the monetary payout that perhaps other legal options would have afforded you?
Well, it's not earthly monetary payoff, right? It's where my heart is, and it's what I feel like all of the life experiences that led me up to the point that I heard about Georgia Justice Project prepared me for. And I really take it always back to Mercer undergraduate. And I'm so glad that Professor Harshberger could be here today, because I take it all the way back to my first honors class at Mercer undergraduate, where I was, I guess, fresh off the boat from Cordele, Georgia, and really kind of starting to shape my perspective of the world and learn a lot about the world that I had not known before. And a lot of that learning had to do with the injustice that's out there in the world. And Professor Harshberger heard me talking in one of our honors classes and just being appalled at the way that, actually at this time it was the genocide in Sudan that was just really eating at me. And he heard the way I talked about it and that I was passionate about it, and he said, I really want you to look into getting involved with a group called Amnesty International. We used to have a student branch on campus, but we don't now. Would you maybe consider rekindling the organization? So I said, let me go read about it and see what it's all about. And I did. Amnesty International was a human rights organization, and I took it on and learned a lot through that process. We built a lot of connections on campus with students, but we also brought people in to speak from off campus to educate us and the other students on various issues. One of the forums that we had on campus was a criminal justice type forum where we brought in some law professors to speak with us about the death penalty specifically. And one of those professors was Professor Tim Floyd, who's here today, and Sarah Gerwig-Moore and Jack Sammons. And those three law professors, I think Sarah wasn't even a professor at Mercer Law at that time, but she came shortly after. So when I started looking at law schools, there was already these three professors I already knew and admired, and had exposed me to this issue of how human rights plays out in various ways throughout the world. But here in our backyard, I really saw the key human rights issue being problems with our criminal justice system. So when I went to Mercer Law School, I got involved with their Law and Public Service program, and one of the first agencies that I read about was the Georgia Justice Project. And I was so excited, and I was so blown away at the low recidivism rates, at the way they were addressing the problem that was, like I said earlier, not a Band-Aid, but actually a real solution for helping people rebuild their lives. And I just knew I wanted to be involved in one way or another, and I knew we wanted them to come to Macon. Because a lot of the things that we talked about at Mercer undergrad and in Mercer Law School as students deciding whether or not to stay in this community was our high crime rates. And so we wanted to find a way to really address that problem, and I think Georgia Justice Project really has the potential to do that and is doing that in Macon. But I also remember the day that I kind of made the decision that this was what I wanted to do. I had been commuting up to Atlanta to do some training under my predecessor, Marissa Dodson. And I thought, I just love this work so much. I was just talking with some other lawyers this morning about how this was the first job I had that I kind of understood what my granddad had always said to me. And what my granddad always says was, I don't have to go to work every day, I get to go to work every day. And I just never could understand that concept. I thought, no, I have to go to work. But when I got involved with Georgia Justice Project, I got to go to work. And I got up early because I was so passionate about what we were doing. I wanted to get there and help people as soon as I was awake and going. And I remember driving back from Atlanta one day and coming to Macon and saying, I really want to do this as my career. And I really want them to come to Macon, outside of what we were already doing as students. And then I also remember just being so afraid that there would be barriers in the way, like money, that would prevent me from doing it. And I said a little prayer about it, and I said, Lord, I think I found what I want to do, and please help me not to let something earthly like money get in the way of it. And ever since then, there are always struggles, but he helps me to work through them by giving me the resources I need. And we were lucky that when I graduated, I got a fellowship that enabled me to do this first 2 years of work and still be able to pay back my student loans and be able to pay my bills. So I was able to get just what I need. I think that's a problem that a lot of us have coming out is the world kind of forces on you all these things you're supposed to have, status symbols and all these. You think you need to go buy a house right away. You think you need to go get a nice car and go get all these nice suits. But those are just earthly status symbols. And if you could just kind of curtail that, you realize you don't need as much as you think you need. And you can pursue your dream without having to let these earthly trappings of money keep you from fulfilling that dream. And when people always say to me, why don't you, a lot of times I have a lot of family members that say, why don't you go make more money? You could help us more. I say, well, my treasures are not here, right? We talk about this a lot when we talk about faith. My treasures are not going to be on earth, and I've just accepted that. And I feel much better with them and much safer with them being in heaven.
So your faith then is a part of what drew you to this work.
I think, yes, my faith has always been strong, but I think actually this work was God's way of connecting all of the experiences I had prior to this and making them all make sense. And so it's therefore grown my faith immensely since I've been working with Georgia Justice Project. But faith definitely played a key role because one of the things that I saw that in this injustice work that I thought was really unfair was this concept of second chances. And that people in the world really have a difficult time giving second chances. So even though we might be Christian and we say we should give second chances, it can be very difficult to forgive people. It can be very difficult to forgive our friends when they hurt us, our family when they hurt us, how much even more when you have somebody that's committed a crime in society. So I think just that moral background did attribute to the mindset that led me there. But I also think it was a way of God's making sense of all the things that I thought were maybe burdens early on in life or experiences I thought were real hardships, they were really all teaching mechanisms to help me get in the mindset that I needed to be able to really deeply connect with the clients at Georgia Justice Project. And I'll give you an example of this. It's kind of a personal example, so don't go seeking out information on it or anything. But my sophomore year in undergrad, my mother was actually arrested. And she's actually a professional woman and had somebody in her office stealing. And then they kind of said, no, it wasn't me, it was her. And they arrested her without asking questions. She was literally providing care for one of her patients when they came and ripped her out of her office and arrested her. And I thought at that time, as a sophomore in college, like, why am I going through this? I'm sure my friends are not having their mother arrested and wondering, is she going to get out of jail? Is she going to have to go to jail? What are we going to do about my little brothers? At that time, we had looked into me having to take care of them. As a sophomore in college, it was just a really devastating experience. And I thought during that time, why in the world did this happen to me? And I have to say, it happened to me. I know it did because it was God's way of preparing me to really, truly understand what it's like for the family members of our clients not to know when their family member is going to get out, to be treated terribly because you're even affiliated with somebody that is in jail, and the uncertainty of knowing what's going to happen. And I think it made the day that particular experience made sense. We were in court in Atlanta. It was one of my first days in court, watching some of our Georgia Justice attorneys in action, but I was also watching some public defenders in action. And they had brought a man that was incarcerated to court for his court date that day. Well, I knew from Mama being on the inside, you're counting the days down to figure out when that court date is. And so I knew that man was counting his days till he got to court that day. Well, they decided, for whatever reason, they were not going to do anything with his case that day. And I remember the bailiff asking the attorney, do you want to go tell him what's happened before we take him back? And she was so busy with her many, many cases, she says, no, I'll deal with that later. And I thought how devastating it must be for that man. I would definitely take the time, no matter how busy I was, to go back and tell him, because I understood what it was like for him to be counting those days. And that's when I realized God might have given those experiences to me and those hardships to me to give me that perspective so that I could really understand where the client was coming from in a unique way.
Well, let me ask, it seems like Georgia Justice Project makes at least two assumptions. One is that people do not enter the criminal justice system in a vacuum, that there are systemic issues, that there are systemic forces. I mean, 90 to 95% come from low income. That doesn't mean people are born bad. That means that they're born poor, and that has some effect. So the first assumption is that they're not involved in the criminal justice system coming out of some sort of vacuum, that there are other factors involved than just the behavior itself. Secondly, it seems that the Georgia Justice Project wants to presume that people are redeemable, that you can restore a person, that you can bring them back and make them a productive and whole member of society. And so my question is, are those assumptions, do I have the assumption, am I reading that right? And if so, is there any kind of story or case that comes to mind that might verify those presumptions?
Yes, I think that's what Georgia Justice Project is all about, is that crime does not exist in this vacuum, that there are a lot of contributing factors. I mentioned a few of them earlier. It could be drug addiction, it could be mental illness, it could be lack of education, lack of family support, never having the tools that you needed that sometimes we take for granted that you need to get ahead in life. And the key person that I think about when I think about us being able to restore, not us being able to restore an individual, but to provide them with the tools they need to restore themselves, and someone that got involved with the criminal justice system, not because they were a bad person, but because their life experiences really had been pretty awful. And this client actually grew up in the Methodist Children's Home here in Macon. He grew up without knowing who his mother and his father were, and of course, had the struggles that go along with that, with not being able to reconcile that. However, he was very intelligent, so he always did very, very well at school, And even though in high school he'd gotten a little bit of trouble here and there, he was able to maintain his grades and go on to get a scholarship to go to college. However, prior to leaving for college, he got involved with a group of young men that we would call a gang. And for him, he said they kind of filled that void of family that he had never had. And for once, he had this group of brothers, and the older boys kind of served as a father figure. And they got him involved in some things that he should definitely not have been involved in. And this was prior to his leaving to go up to Atlanta to go to college on this scholarship. And some of the crimes they got him involved with were financial crimes. So they would do like financial ID theft, and I guess they needed his brains to be able to do these crimes. So he went off to college after these particular crimes were committed and was arrested while he was at college and later charged with these crimes. He, of course, is incarcerated. And these financial crimes can be incarcerated. You can be incarcerated for a long time for financial ID fraud. And I think he went to prison for 3 years. Missed his kind of the boat on his scholarship. Of course, they revoked that at college. And I came in touch with him as he was coming out of prison with big dreams, but not really fully understanding everything he was about to be up against because of that background. His dream after this experience was to create his own school or home for boys that grew up like he did, but to provide the support that he felt like he didn't get, to make it kind of a family unit. But with a criminal history, it's very difficult for an individual to work with kids. And when he heard about us, he came to me to ask me, am I really ever going to be able to do this? And I told him, yes, there's always a way. Where there's a will, there's a way, you know. And he was getting enrolled in school during this time, actually as a Mercer student, working 2 jobs, going to Mercer, and had this big dream. So he's really struggling, trying to make ends meet, still getting education. Oh, and by the way, I failed to mention he had 2 children prior to going off to college. So also having 2 children to care for whose mother was incarcerated. Full custody of 2 kids, 2 jobs, Mercer student, and this criminal history holding him back. Well, one of the things he was finding trouble doing is paying for the high cost of housing and making sure his children had a safe and secure place to live. So really what they were having to do is move from aunt to cousin, and it seemed like every other week that I talked to him, he was having some kind of struggle with finding a new place to live. Also during this time, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So talk about the struggles and the obstacles that this kid was up against, but he still just kept trying and trying and trying. I think the greatest victory that I saw through our representation of him was he applied for some assistance with housing. They said no, flat out, from the get-go because he had a record. That's generally the policy when you apply for some help with housing. And we went to this hearing where we advocated on his behalf and told his story for him, or kind of gave him the support he needed to also tell his own story. And the people in that hearing were so moved by his desire to use these experiences as a learning experience to give back and prevent other boys from going down that same road. They were moved to tears in this hearing. And generally they wait 3 or 4 months before saying yes or no, you can or can't have housing. But the lady that day, she said, I'm going to tell you right now, you've moved me, your dream has moved me, your tenacity at overcoming these obstacles has really moved me, and I'm going to tell you today, I'm going to give you housing. And I'd not seen him smile in months because, like I said, it was just obstacle after obstacle. I really maybe had never seen him smile, but he busted out in the biggest grin I've ever seen on any of our clients, and it just, made my heart swell to see his excitement that after all of these defeats, here is one little victory that's going to keep me going and show me that people do care about me and will give me a second chance if I just keep trying. And as we walked out of the housing authority that day, he said, I can't wait to tell my girls that for the first time they're going to have their own bedroom and they're going to have their own space to live in. And I about started cried right then and there, but I held it until I got to my car, and I cried so much because it was such what we would consider legally a small victory, but it wasn't a small victory for him. It was a symbol that he was going to be able to make it if he just kept at it and kept fighting the obstacles that were against him. And so I think he's a great example of how those crimes didn't come out of a vacuum, and he's definitely going to be restored because of the encouragement that he's got within him.
Great. We have just a few moments, and I want to give an opportunity for those who've gathered to maybe address a question to you. So let me turn to our audience and ask if there's anything that Ashley has said or hasn't said that you would be interested in asking her about. Any questions that you have, and state them, and then I'm going to repeat them so that we can be able to hear them for everyone. And if no questions, then I'm going to have to ask another one. Anyone? All right. Yes, Larry.
I'm Larry Schlesinger, I'm a rabbi coming from Israel. I had someone come to me, this was probably about 2 years ago, looking for a job. And I hooked him up with a local place. And the owner of the place said, I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to do a drug check, I'm going to do a criminal background check, and I am going to do a credit check. If he fails any one of those, he's not going to get the job. This was menial work, I will say. I went back to him. I said, he's going to give you a criminal background check, he's going to give you a drug check, he's going to give you a credit check. You're going to pass all those? He said yes. Bottom line was he didn't pass the criminal background check. But what I find is that, once you have a record, that's like 2, maybe 3 strikes against you. And that even for, the most menial of work, if you've done time or you've been convicted or even arrested, because the arrest, stays on your record, that puts you at a, significant disadvantage. So how can we affect change, not necessarily among those who've been incarcerated, but amongst the thinking of those who, offer, jobs? I mean, I can understand, that they want to get the best quality person that they want, but, if you, have this on your record and you can't get a job, then what's your choice then after that to make ends meet?
The question, just so that we can make sure that we hear it on our recording, is an incident that Rabbi Schlesinger indicated of a person who was trying to help find work. Ended up that the person had a criminal record, and therefore that was going to constantly be an obstacle for his being able to successfully pursue any kind of work, even the most menial. And so the question is, what can be done to assist people who already have a criminal record, being able to move them forward and getting jobs and other
This is the issue I address every day, and that's what all our work in Macon primarily focuses around criminal history issues. There's a lot of ways to address it. The first thing that I do is I look at a person's criminal record and I figure out what can we do about it. If I have somebody with just one charge on their record, it's very likely that we may be able to seal that charge, so I may be able to prevent them in the future from having a criminal record at all. Also, as you referred to, in Georgia, if you have an arrest, a mere arrest, not even a conviction, it's on your criminal record. And if it's only arrests on that record, then we can expunge those records. So the first thing we do is try to get off what we can get off, and then what we're left with, we work with, because we are able to get our clients employed. It's very difficult, and there are a lot of barriers. But there's able to make that heart and mind change like you're talking about with employers. A couple of ways that we've done this. For each client that comes, it's very rare that we're lucky enough we're going to get everything off their record. So what we do is we have some employment counseling. And what we do is we teach them the incentives that are out there for employers to hire ex-offenders. And there's actually two very strong incentives. There's a program called the Federal Bonding Program, and it insures an employer basically up to $5,000 against any damage caused by an ex-offender. And then there's also something called a Work Opportunity Tax Credit. So it gives an employer a tax credit for hiring an individual that's recently been released or finished their sentence. That's one reason the Purdue chicken plant here in Macon is very well known for hiring ex-offenders. It's saving them a lot of money. It's not just an idealistic desire to help. I wish it was. But those are two incentives that we use. Also, one thing that we do is most individuals that are applying for these jobs don't know how to explain their background. They're trying to kind of dodge the bullet, so they don't want to bring it up, and they oftentimes don't brainstorm how they are going to deal with it when it is brought up. So what we do is from the get-go, when they're applying for jobs, we help them draft a letter. And that letter, a lot of my clients, when we formulate this letter, call it kind of therapy, because it's their chance to explain those underlying causes that led them to commit crime in the first place, and to point out for an employer, this was 10 or 15 years ago. Usually when an employer gets that record, they're not taking the time to go through and see what exactly the charge was, how long ago it was, and what the outcome was. So if it comes directly from the individual, first of all, they look professional, having written a letter with their own letterhead, but also it humanizes them. Suddenly they're not just that checkbox and, yes, I have a criminal record. They're an individual with a story that led them to that crime in the first place. And we've had a lot of success with that. Now, there are some corporate employers that still have blanket policies, and actually the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has ruled that is not constitutional under the Title VII Act, of the Civil Rights Act. So we can hold some large employers accountable for having these blanket policies against people with criminal records. The gist of the law is that the crime has to relate to the type of work. So for menial laborer to not be granted the ability to work or do some kind of physical work because they have a DUI, for example, would be totally irrational and actually is not in compliance with the law. The reason you see employers still doing this, though, is because these individuals have not had an advocate to teach them that they had those rights and then fight for those rights. So we're just now starting to address that issue with the employers. But there is hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, a very good question, Ashley. It's clear to anyone who listens to you that this isn't just your job, that this really is your calling, and you speak so well about it, and you inspire us all and challenge us all in a world where there's still so much injustice that we can be a part of bringing about justice for all. So if you would, help me in thanking Ashley for her being with us today.
Thank you.